What scares you the most? Ghosts? Demons? Psycho killers? Creepy dolls? Flesh-eating zombies? No matter what strange irrational phobia reduces you to a quivering wreck, the horror genre has likely exploited it. Since the birth of cinema, horror movies have forced us to confront our deepest and most primal fears. Horror is often unfairly maligned as cinema's most disreputable genre, but it's produced some of the most lucrative, popular, and imaginative cinema in history. I'm Mike Muncer, host of the Evolution of Horror podcast, and these are some of the most influential scary movies you can watch right now on Prime Video. Let's begin with the first golden age of horror cinema, the 1930s. Universal Studios dominated this decade with a string of hugely successful monster movies like Dracula and Frankenstein, but this slightly lesser known Universal horror film is one of my personal favourites. Made by Frankenstein director James Whale, The Old Dark House sets the template for the classic horror tale. We begin on a dark and stormy night. Three friends are lost in the woods and find shelter in, you guessed it, an old dark house.
You will have to stay here. The misfortune is yours, not ours.
The house is owned by creepy siblings and their butler who share a sinister secret. They keep their crazed, murderous younger brother locked upstairs. The pre-war horror of the 1930s was all about fear of the other. Scary movies were usually set in Transylvanian castles or strange Gothic mansions like this one. Drawing from German expressionist movies of the 1920s like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Universal horror movies were dark and monochrome, making use of confined spaces and looming shadows. The Old Dark House is quintessential classic horror and influenced how the genre would look and sound for the next 30 years.
The sins of the fathers. The sins of the fathers.
I'll interrupt to bring this to you.
But in the 1960s, horror would change forever. In 1968, a young filmmaker called George A. Romero made a cheap indie horror film with his mates. It begins with a brother and sister visiting their grandfather's grave.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Before being attacked by a monster the likes of which we'd never seen before, a flesh-eating zombie. With Night of the Living Dead, Romero single-handedly invented the modern zombie, a slow-moving, shuffling corpse back from the dead and hungry for human flesh. These monsters weren't from Gothic dungeons or Transylvanian castles. They were right outside our door, breaking into our home. This was a horror story set very deliberately in modern-day America. Compared to the Universal movies of the 30s, the horror in Night of the Living Dead feels raw, unflinching, and real. Romero uses a mix of handheld camera work and fake news footage to make us feel like we're watching a genuine zombie apocalypse happen in real time.
Chief, do you think we'll be able to defeat these things?
Well, we killed 19 of them today right in this area.
Romero also broke new ground by casting African-American actor Dwayne Jones in the lead role of Ben. Unlike other movies starring black actors at the time, there's no mention of Ben's skin color. Yet, it's difficult to ignore the chilling and prescient connotations of some of the film's most startling images. Like when Ben is mistaken for a zombie and is coldly and mercilessly shot dead by the police.
Good shot.
For a 50-year-old zombie movie, Night of the Living Dead remains every bit as shocking as when it first staggered onto our screens. But not all horror movies rely on gritty realism to get under our skin. Through the 70s and 80s, a wave of gruesome, gory Italian horror movies arrived with a bang. These films weren't worried about social realism, political subtext, or any kind of logic. They cared about one thing: being as nightmarish as possible. Perhaps the scariest and most bonkers of this wave of Italian shockers is Dario Argento's Suspiria. Much like The Old Dark House, the film begins on a dark and stormy night, as our main character finds herself taking shelter from the rain in a large, ominous building. But this isn't an old dark house, it's a huge, decadent dance school. One that happens to be run by a coven of witches, and becomes the setting for a series of grisly murders. Compared to the dark monochrome of The Old Dark House and Night of the Living Dead, Suspiria is a bright, lavish Technicolor fever dream. Nothing makes any logical sense and everything feels dangerous. In Suspiria, a character might find herself running down an endless corridor before inexplicably falling into a room teeming with barbed wire. Or characters might find the room they're in is crawling with bugs. Or opening a door to find this. Suspiria has recently been reimagined by Call Me By Your Name director Luca Guadagnino, which contains some equally terrifying moments. But Argento's hypnotic original remains unique, a brain-melting LSD-fueled dark fairy tale, and one that needs to be seen to be believed. Suspiria's macabre murders helped pave the way for one of horror's most popular and lucrative subgenres, the slasher. We all know the format. A bunch of misbehaving teens get picked off one by one by a masked madman wielding a big phallic weapon. The teen slasher movie was at its peak of popularity in the early 80s, but this is one of my favourites, My Bloody Valentine. Like all great slashers, the film centres on a small American town with a dark history. 30 years ago on Valentine's Day, a homicidal lunatic slaughtered a bunch of townsfolk, and legend has it that the killer will return if the town ever celebrates Valentine's Day again. 30 years later, and wouldn't you know it, a bunch of horny teens are planning a big Valentine's blowout. Sure enough, people start receiving menacing Valentine's gifts.
Roses are red, violets are blue. One is dead, so are you?
And murder and mayhem promptly ensues. What sets My Bloody Valentine apart from the slew of other slashers from the time is the authentically creepy atmosphere it creates through production design. Filmed in a gloomy, ghostly mining town in Nova Scotia, most scenes of horror were filmed in real underground mines, creating a palpable sense of dread and claustrophobia. As the actors navigate their way through dark, treacherous tunnels and climb rickety old ladders, their fear often looks genuine. Like the best slasher movies, My Bloody Valentine is an adrenaline-fueled rollercoaster ride, guaranteed to make you laugh, jump, and scream. But by the 2010s, horror had moved on from gory body count movies and gotten a bit more introspective. In Jennifer Kent's debut feature film, Amelia and her son Samuel are being menaced by a terrifying monster called the Babadook.
There is no Babadook!
But this movie is less interested in the monster itself and more concerned with the character's inner demons. Jennifer Kent uses tropes of classic horror going all the way back to German expressionism and silent cinema to tell a story about mental health. Most horror movies are about the final girl defeating the monster, but here Amelia realises that this particular beast she might simply have to live with.
It's alright. It's alright.
The Babadook is an example of what horror cinema does best and what it's done so well for the last 100 years. It allows us to face our greatest fears in a safe, cathartic space. Horror holds a mirror up to society and reflects the fears of a generation. But it also lets us look inwards to confront our own personal demons and inner darkness. Horror is a roller coaster. We scream, we laugh, and then we feel better. So why not sit back, grab some popcorn, turn the lights down and the volume up. Watch one of these brilliant horror movies and give yourself a damn good scare. Let us know in the comments below which film you'll dare to watch first, and hit subscribe for more recommendations on Prime Video.